What is going on, guys? It is Wrestlegamia here, back with another video. In wrestling, there are always those unwritten power rankings that we're expected to follow as part of the story. For example, despite being half his age and in much better physical shape, it would be insane to imagine Angel Garza beating The Undertaker because, well, The Undertaker has built up a higher power level. The same could also be said for the likes of Goldberg, Triple H, John Cena, and many others. Well, wrestling games have their own power levels too, and sometimes there are characters that are somewhat overpowered, making the game altogether difficult to play whenever they're involved. Some of these are more justified than others, but they all have one thing in common. They're a hell of a challenge, sometimes even impossible to beat. So be sure to subscribe and click on that notification bell, because today we're looking at 10 of the most overpowered wrestlers in wrestling video games. Number 1. Brock Lesnar and Goldberg in Here Comes the Pain. If you switched on WWE television today and tried to figure out who were the most overpowered characters on the roster, you would undoubtedly decide upon Brock Lesnar and Bill Goldberg. Well, even as far back as 2003 this was the case too, because these two were nigh on impossible to put down when fighting them in SmackDown Here Comes the Pain. Of course, this was years before Brock ended the Undertaker's streak and Goldberg would squash a good portion of the WWE roster half his age, but even then they were booked as super-powered main eventers, so it does kind of make sense. Unless you're selecting a fighter who had huge power stats, you would have to do seemingly endless moves to just get one of their limbs to switch over to yellow damage, and that was only the start of wearing them down. What made it even more unbalanced was that either of them could put you in that state with just 2 or 3 moves, making matches very lopsided. We applaud anyone who managed to beat them. Number 2. Taka Michinoku in No Mercy. No, April Fool's Day has come and gone, and you might be telling yourself, we played No Mercy until our fingers bled and we don't remember Taka Michinoku being that hard to beat. Well, there is a caveat to this one. It only applies during the Royal Rumble matches or General Battle Royals. For some bizarre reason, if you encountered Taka during one of these matches, he was nearly impossible to eliminate. We're not quite sure why this was, and we'd be curious to know if everyone else felt the same way, but this was one of the biggest challenges we've ever come across in a WWE game. It's not like Taka was known for being good in Battle Royals either. In fact, maybe his most famous moment on the roster, with the exception of Choppy Choppy Your Pee-Pee, was seeing him face planting spectacularly after being held out of the ring during the 2000 Rumble. Regardless, go back and try this one out and you might be surprised. Number 3. Triple H in No Mercy. No, we're not done with No Mercy just yet. Those who played through the game's story mode may remember that if you got to the stage of fighting the game at Wrestlemania, that he would suddenly go Super Saiyan, even by his standards, and start reversing almost every move you threw at him. This one could be justified as you're just trying to win at Wrestlemania, the biggest show of all, so it makes sense that the difficulty would be ramped up here, but it's suspicious that it's the notoriously protective Triple H who is the one who gets to be unbeatable, especially given the stories we've heard in the past about him not being able to look weak in promotional material for games in the WWE 2K series. For the record, it wouldn't be the only time that Triple H was this powerful either, as he was equally difficult to topple in the GameCube exclusive Day of Reckoning 2, so it seems that in the video game world at least, Triple H really is the King of Kings. Number 4. Stone Cold Steve Austin in Warzone. To call 1998's Warzone a classic may be a bit of a stretch, but it certainly was a popular title back in the day, as it came right at a time when the Attitude Era was starting to explode into the mainstream. Of course, the top star of the day, and perhaps the top star of all time looking back on it, was Stone Cold Steve Austin. And with this in mind, it only made sense that he would be one of the toughest characters to beat. However, for as difficult as the base game version of him was to take down, there was also a special unlockable version available to players which had all of his stats maxed out, making taking him on essentially the equivalent of fighting Godzilla and King Kong combined. Okay, maybe it wasn't that dramatic, but it certainly made him a challenge to defeat. Let's be honest though, few people were fighting against Steve Austin in this game because most of us were playing as him or at least fighting with our friends over who got to choose him first. Number 5. The Big Show in Day of Reckoning. We've already mentioned earlier that Day of Reckoning 2 featured a hugely overpowered version of Triple H, but the original title also had its fair share of this in the form of The Big Show. Now, The Big Show looks like someone who should be overpowered on the level of an Andre the Giant, but for a variety of reasons, he never really reached this status in the WWE. Well, at least he got there in the video game world, because if you played through the story mode here and you chose to go to SmackDown, you would find that your first match was against Paul White himself. For some reason, the CPU decided to ramp itself up to sky-high levels here, and show became an absolute nightmare to beat. God forbid you choose a light heavyweight wrestler too, because if you did, then you were going to have an even more difficult time here, as a lot of your moves simply weren't going to work on him since your character didn't have the strength to execute them properly. Damn you weight detection physics. This allowed him to simply reverse the moves or not sell them at all. Yeah, to say this one was a challenge is an understatement. Number 6. The Great Khali in SmackDown vs Raw 2007. When SmackDown vs Raw 2007 rolled out, 2K had tweaked the weight detection system to make it more realistic. Now this wasn't a bad move in itself, but where it did make things difficult though, was with the inclusion of the Great Khali, who given his gargantuan size was put in a weight class all of his own, allegedly 2 classes higher than the next heaviest person on the roster. Now this is realistic as Khali is up there with the very few like Andre the Giant or Giant Gonzalez, who would be classed as a truly super heavyweight wrestler, but it did make him pretty much impossible to fight unless you chose to play as a heavyweight yourself. Choose anyone below this level and you were pretty much guaranteeing that most of your moves wouldn't work on him, so we pity the Rey Mysterio fans out there. Even if you did choose a heavyweight, it wasn't exactly a walk in the park as he still presented a hell of a challenge. It's a shame Khali wasn't a better wrestler in reality, because with his imposing size, he really could have been something special if he'd given the company something more to work with. Number 7. John Cena in WWE 2K17. John Cena has certainly earned the nickname Big Match John for his 1980s Hulkamania level of wrestling superpowers, which saw him beat pretty much everyone on the roster, much to the chagrin of many fans at the time. By the time 2K17 came out, Cena's legend status was well and truly established, and it was accepted that to beat him on WWE television, you would pretty much have to throw a tank at him for the most part because he always overcame the odds. This was reflected in that year's game, as players reported having a very difficult time pinning him due to his incredibly high stats. Some have even said that they had thrown as many as 6 pop-up powerbombs at him, with him still refusing to stay down for the 3 count. These days it seems that the company is much more willing for Cena to lose to people, given his part-time status, so we may never see this level of Super Cena in a game again. Number 8. Braun Strowman in WWE 2K19. Similar to the difficulties that many people had when fighting the Big Show in 2004's Day of Reckoning game, Braun Strowman presented a similar challenge in 2K19 because when playing through the game's My Career mode, one of your early challenges would be to face the monster among men one-on-one. You may be thinking, that's not so bad, we could easily do that, but this was at a point where your character barely had any skills or attribute points to their name, so taking on Strowman here presented a particularly difficult challenge which few could have relished having to do. The worst thing about all of this was that there was no reward for those who managed to beat him, not even a unique cutscene or line of dialogue. Instead, the game played out exactly the way it would have if you had lost, making players wonder what the point of all of that effort was in the first place. Either way, it's a lesson to rookie wrestlers: don't challenge Braun Strowman. We wish someone could have advised the parade of Raw jobbers like James Ellsworth this before they'd stepped up and got squashed in brutal fashion. Number 9. The Undertaker in WWE 2K14. 2K14 included the infamous Beat the Street mode, where you could try and do what no one else had been able to do at the time of release by beating the Undertaker at Wrestlemania. An interesting side note here is that it was fortuitous 2K included the mode this time around, as by the time 2K15 came out, the streak was over and it would no longer have made sense. To make sure the challenge was worthy of the streak name, this version of the dead man that you faced would be ludicrously overpowered to the point where you could spam endless finishes on him and still not get a pinfall. To be fair, this did replicate the feeling of watching those streak matches where just when it seemed like it was all over, The Undertaker would kick out at 2 7/8 of a second in some of the highest moments of drama in WWE. Only few managed to complete this, and we're pretty sure a few people gave themselves an ulcer while trying to beat it, but there are videos out there on YouTube of some managing to do it. We think those who did deserve a medal because this might constitute the most overpowered wrestler of all time. And number 10, Eric Bischoff in SmackDown Here Comes the Pain. You might be thinking to yourself, how does one of the weakest players in the game's entire history be overpowered? Simple, by one glitch. Now, Bischoff can only be the most powerful superstar in one mode and one mode only, that being First Blood matches, because he can't actually bleed. If you select his unlockable leather jacket attire in the game, this model cannot physically bleed. You can face Lesnar and Goldberg and you'll still win with ease. But there you have it guys, 10 of the most overpowered wrestlers in wrestling video games. Be sure to leave your comments down below, subscribe if you haven't already, follow us on Instagram and Twitter, and I'll see you next time with some more wrestling video game content.